How are you? I'm fine. I'm fine. It's been a somewhat long day. Began on Hollywood Boulevard today. Do you know about this? Penn and I got a star on Hollywood Boulevard today. It's very much like a gravestone. Where was it located? It's just west of the Groman's Chinese Theater, about 10 feet from Houdini, and right next to Phyllis Diller. Did you get to pick where you were going to be, or no? They picked that. And then I went from there to the Magic Castle, where we got the Magicians of the Year award, which is just a strange award to get. So here I am in Phoenix now. And that show began with Todd Robbins. And Todd Robbins and I have independently for years had a great fascination with the tricks that spirit mediums did. And Todd became a student of what's called the Midnight Spook Show. Midnight Spook Show was a phenomenon that began around 1929 or so, right about the time that sound films were coming in and vaudeville was going out. So most of the movie theaters that he went to were former live theaters, so they had stages and they were equipped for that, but they just had a movie screen hanging in front of them. And live performers, particularly live magicians, were getting less and less work in those theaters because the movies were taking over for them. And there was a nutty magician who learned about the value of some luminous paint, which is quite lethal, but they didn't know it at the time, and said to theater owners, I can come in at midnight on Saturday night and I can do a show that I guarantee you will sell out with teenagers. And the guy would say, well, really, why? And he said, well, because there's going to be a section of it entirely in the dark, and there's nothing that young couples like more than that. And these shows became a phenomenon. It would be a grisly magic show where people would be taken from the audience and apparently beheaded and that sort of thing. And then that would be followed with a section where you'd throw everybody in the dark at the end, and you'd like throw spaghetti at them while talking about them being covered with grave worms. And these just made fortunes for people. And some of the worst performers in the world made a lot of money off of these things. There's a wonderful story about a lot of alcoholics worked in this form. About an alcoholic who showed up at the climax of his show was the appearance of a monster of some kind. You know, it usually was some mummy or whatever was popular in the cinema at that time. But he left his entire monster costume at home and came in and went, what can I do for this? You know, I was drunk. What can I do for this? And looked around the green room and noticed a deer's head mounted on the wall, and borrowed his wife's fur coat and put the deer head on, and that was his monster for the evening. But what questions do you guys have? Anyway, this form became very popular. Todd and I took it and said, well, what could we do that would be a little more artistic with it, with a little better tricks? And that's how this play developed.
Well, I'll start off with a question, and I'll go on out with the microphone and everything.
Sure.
Had you been to, circus shows, side shows, horror shows like this growing up? Was that part of your experience at the tail end of?
No, I only dreamed about them. You know, I mean, I read about them and I dreamed about them, and I thought this is such a cool show. I loved horror movies, but there was really no. By the time I was growing up, there was no such thing as a horror show like this. I went to sideshows a lot with Penn because he had a lot of circus background, and we met a lot of the sideshow people. And Todd really is a sideshow guy. Todd is like the king of Coney Island, and he knows every 100-year-old sideshow person in the world, and he's on fluid terms with them all. So, I mean, he really did know Congo. The stories that he's telling are almost entirely true. Congo, the jungle creep, really did work on 42nd Street and really was a geek who bit off the rat's heads. Eusapia Palladino really was a celebrated spirit medium who fooled the hell out of everybody because, she really was. She's a little Italian lady, actually didn't speak any English, although we claim that she did in this. But scientists would come in and she would do she was specialized in table rising, which she did. She was a big fat thing with very strong legs, and she'd hook her foot underneath the table and clamp it underneath this very sturdy arm. And the table would go gyrating around the room, and all these Harvard professors would be going, as they're sitting in the dark, Harvard professors would go, well, there must be some anti-gravity thing that she's in control of. She just had a big, strong foot, but she was a bitch. And Marjorie, the Boston medium, was Houdini's, the person who came the closest to really knocking Houdini in his campaign to expose spirit mediums, because she was so sexy and Houdini was such a prude. So the very idea that she'd get naked in the seance room, she'd throw her feet into men's laps and manipulate their crotches, it just freaked Houdini out. And he wrote a very mean pamphlet about her, which she deserved in every possible way.
As I go on out, tell us just about the production. When did it take place? Where was it? And just in a way, putting it together. I think people will love it.
Boy, it was hard. I mean, this is a very hard art form to work in. Because it's magic, which is very hard to begin with, because you're trying to make something look real that isn't real. And we did 3 workshop productions of it over the course of 3 years. We did major rewrites of it. The only things that stayed from the very beginning to the very end were the Dorothy story, which is absolutely true. Todd actually did have an elderly friend, Dorothy Bembridge, who was actually murdered under those circumstances. I mean, all of this stuff is, Todd really did go to cemeteries as a teenager and take his friends down into the cemetery and scare the hell out of them and leave them in sexual ecstasy. And so that hand trick and pulling the demon out of the audience member's stomach were the only 2 tricks that we really started with. And then we also started with the mysterious box that you stick your hand in and it's covered with blood. But over the course of 3 years, we developed the show. And then during the second workshop, one night, this guy named Juan, he's telling the story about, a guy named Juan came up for that trick where the name shows up in ashes. And he absolutely went to pieces. And it was one of the most amazing moments of theater that I had ever seen, because this guy actually was, terribly upset and crying on stage, and Todd brought him around and was very honest with him, and he came back and he was happy and he was sent away, and at the end of that night, Todd sent me an email. He said, I knew the material we were dealing with was powerful. I did not know it was nuclear. And we realized that we had actually done an immoral thing by opening that door in the theater. And that's where that story came from. And once that event happened, the shape of the show became apparent to us. Originally, we did a show just like the spook shows, all the darkness at the end. But when that happened, we realized we had to differentiate between the seance-y sort of stuff that you see in the movies, which is the dark seance number 2, and the stuff that really disturbs people, the personal readings and all of that sort of stuff like we do towards the end. And then out of that arose the idea of just the pleasure of putting a large group of people in total darkness and let them think that they're doing all those funny things to each other. And it's just, people absolutely adored that. You've never been in a room that's totally in darkness. There's always exit signs. There's always some light. When you're in that room and people with total darkness, it's just, it releases things in you. It's really powerful.
You have a question here in the back?
Oh, where are you? Okay, hi.
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 I'm a big fan. I was wondering, there's this wonderful, terrible movie called Wizard of Gore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean is it an influence in that it's terrible, because it was great. Mm-hmm. But is it an influence at all? Just, I don't know, maybe it just felt like it because it was on a stage and there was gore. But
undoubtedly, there is. I mean, both Todd and I know that movie, and undoubtedly there was some connection with it. But this came out of Todd's and my passion for this form, and the gore all over his suit, for example, just seemed right, because you see ministers in those suits all the time, and it's nice to see blood all over a minister. Anybody else? Yeah.
I know there were several camera cuts. How much of the show got cut out for time and how long does the show actually run when you see it live?
The film runs about 1 hour and 15 minutes, and the show ran about 1 hour and 25. And the difference was all the time that it takes to get people up on stage, and sort of all the busy work. So the little trims we made here and there were just to take out the stuff that you always tolerate and even like in the theater. But when you get it on film, it's too slow. So that's where those went.
So, just a quick question. With the show itself, I'm sorry, I'm trying to collect my
Well, just transmit
brain.
them directly to me. I'm psychic.
So, as watching this, obviously, it's a lot of it has to do with the psychology and really capturing your audience and keeping them in suspense. Is there any point in time, despite how masterful you and Todd are as magicians, is there any point in time in any of the shows where you kind of had to use improvisation to bring back the audience because maybe at some point in time maybe you kind of lost them?
Yeah, Todd doesn't lose people. I mean, Todd is an improviser, and and part of what makes that show so much fun is that Todd is funny. So Todd's funny all the way through, even though he's dealing with these really dark ideas. So he can take a moment where a woman doesn't have her shoes on and just turn it around so that it becomes part of the show. But there is a lot of ebb and flow in that because there's so much interaction with the audience. So yes, there were lots of things that he had to do to make sure that the show kept going. This is a daredevil show. It's fucking hard magic. I mean, everything in that is a monstrous. I was watching it tonight going, oh my God, we're going to do this again in Los Angeles in the fall. And we had a production of it in Mexico, in Spanish, not so long ago, to whom we sold all of our props. So everything about this has to be recreated from scratch. And I'm sitting there in my seat going, oh my God, this is an epic thing. Because it all looks very simple, and man, it's not. As you can, I'm very proud of some of the stuff. The killing the guy in the tub